how do we actually create a random selection? Well, we're going to figure out a couple ways to produce randomization. But first, what we want to do is talk just briefly about how not to randomize. Being random is nearly impossible for our species. It seems our entire psyches are hardwired to find patterns, so much so we will try to find patterns when there really aren't even any. So trying to come up with a sequence of random numbers, don't try to just pick them. It's not going to work. We can't do random. But there are ways to produce a random sequence of numbers. You could do the proverbial drawing from a hat, or a bag, or a box, or any kind of container. If you want a random sequence of numbers from 1 to 10, you put ping pong balls into a box and numbered 1 through 10, and you just run them around and pick them out, and that would be a random selection. In almost every stats textbook, in some appendix somewhere, there is a random number table, which I'm going to show you how to use, which is just a computer-generated random sequence of numbers. Your calculator, at least if it's a graphing calculator, TI-84, for example, has a random number generating function in it that can be used. And I'm sure there's all kinds of creative other ways of randomly picking numbers. But these are the most typical. Let's start by looking at an example. The Better Business Bureau, in an attempt to watchdog the used car industry, wants to randomly select 5 used car dealers from the 28 dealers in the county so that they can audit them. There are going to be 2 steps in creating a random selection. Step 1, assign numbers to all the used car dealers. Step 2, then create a randomized sequence of 5 numbers picked from 1 to 28. Right? Sounds simple enough. Pretty much it is. So here's step 1. We got all the cars. I didn't make up names for all of them. That was kind of a pain. But you can get the idea, right? 1 to 28. Every auto dealership has its number. That's step 1. Step 2, right, is the more interesting part. That's actually figuring out how to randomize. I'll go through 3 different methods for generating a random sequence of numbers. The same 3 that I outlined here, right? The drawing kind, random table, and calculator. So, using a marker, put the numbers from 1 to 28 on identical tiles. Key is identical. Right? If the tiles aren't all the same, then the chance of grabbing them are different. So they have to be identical tiles. And then place them in a container with a lid. With the lid on, this is just a safety precaution. Shake the container well, right? There's our randomizing. Take the lid off, and again, a key thing, without looking, draw 5 tiles. If we looked, then all of a sudden our human psyches get involved, our psychology, and we can't be sure that it's random. And so that's a fairly simple way of generating a sequence of 5 random numbers. So now let's talk about the random digits table that is in your stats textbook. We could take a look at the random digits table. There we are. And it's just a whole bank of numbers. It's been computer generated. It's divided into rows and columns, but the rows and columns have absolutely no meaning. They're just to make it kind of easier to work with. You can think of this as literally just one long strand of digits which are in a random sequence. So you can literally start anywhere in this table you want and go from there. So let's go back to our example. So we want a sequence of 5 numbers between 1 and 28. So to use the table, we simply choose a starting point. And we can think we are choosing it randomly, but you have to talk to psychologists to see if it's actually random. For example, I'm just going to say I'm going to start with line 12. I'm just going to start there. It could be anywhere. We go to the table. We say, all right, this is the first line, or this is the line number is not part of the random sequence, so be careful. Some tables don't even have line numbers, you just have to count. It's kind of convenient to have line. So here's line 12. So this is where we're going to start. If we go back, and I'll just write that out. And this should be that 12th line, assuming I copied it down correctly. We need 5 numbers between 1 and 28. So how we work this is, well, 1 to 28 are two-digit numbers. You'll notice that when I created my list, I used 2 digits, including even these 03 as a 2-digit number. Knowing that if I was going to use the table, what I'm going to do is break this up differently. As I said earlier, the rows and columns are arbitrary. It makes no difference. So what I'm going to do is break it up into 2-digit numbers, just like this. Now I'm looking for 5 numbers between 1 and 28. Well, I got a bunch of numbers like 59, which are outside my range. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and look for numbers between 1 and 28, like 4. And, well, there's another 4. But we actually don't want repeats. So this is actually, I'm going to consider just 1 4, because I'm not going to audit the same auto dealership twice. So we go through, here's 11 and 19 and 27, and it doesn't look like there's any more between 1 and 28. And I only have 1, 2, 3, 4. I need another one. So I just, instead of 12, I get the next line and simply continue. So breaking up line 13 into 2 digits, I go along and, oh, there's my 5th one. I don't need any more. All I needed was 5 randomly selected numbers. So my 5 randomly selected numbers are 4, 11, 19, 27, and 2. I can go back to my list and see which auto dealerships those numbers refer to. If instead of 2-digit numbers, I needed 3-digit numbers, I could do something like this. You can see that instead of breaking up into 2-digit numbers, I just broke up this original line into 3-digit numbers. You can see there's sort of a hanging number over here. Well, 3 didn't divide in evenly. You could do one of 2 things. Either you could just skip the 5 and continue. I could have kind of rolled the 5 over and started the 5 over here if I wanted to. It actually doesn't really make too much difference. It's a random sequence of numbers. So now let's talk about the third method, which is using your calculator. I'm, of course, going to be using the TI-84, which is what we've been using this whole time. Here we are. And to get to the random number functions, you press Math. And then over here under Probability, down here we have randint, randnorm, bin. For this, we're going to use random integer. It's going to randomly select an integer. We'll tell to randomly select between 1 and 28. All we have to do is hit enter. All right, randomly select. If we hit enter again, it'll run it again and select a different number. And select a different number. And we could do that, of course, 5 times. Now there's actually a slightly easier way. What you can do is put another comma and specify I want 5 numbers. And then when you hit enter, it'll give you a list of 5 numbers randomly chosen between 1 and 28. There's your list. Just to show you, I suppose, we don't typically use it too much, but randNorm, it's going to randomly select using a normal distribution. Using random integer, 1 to 28, every number has an equal chance of being selected. Random normal, actually, those, you specify the average, the mean, and there's more chance of numbers near the mean being selected than numbers far following the normal distribution. And normal binomial is the same kind of concept. So I can just write this out how I'd like to see it on any kind of homework or test. So whenever you are asked to do this, just make sure to write out the function, the input, and then this is the output, which are the 5 random numbers. I, of course, find this method to be the easiest, but I suppose it's up to you. You can use any of the methods. They should be equally good at getting you random